Watch a single oyster for a minute and almost nothing happens. It sits on the bottom of the bay, shell slightly open, quietly pulling water through its body, but that one oyster cleans up to 50 gallons a day. Now pull back. These are the bays that helped build America. New York Harbor was once the oyster capital of the world, and in the Chesapeake the reefs grew so thick they were a danger to passing ships. Then we lost almost all of it. The water turned green and still, and close to dead. Now people are putting the oyster back by the 100 million and the water's starting to clear. The smallest animal in the bay may turn out to be the thing that saves it. Start with the animal itself. An oyster is not built to be impressive. It does not swim, and it does not hunt. It anchors to a hard surface and it feeds, and the way it feeds is the whole story. It draws bay water in across its gills, strains out the algae and the tiny floating particles, eats what it wants, and pushes clean water back out. One adult can move up to 50 gallons through its body in a single day. As it does that, it pulls out algae, nitrogen, and sediment, the same things that cloud the water and choke the life below it. Scientists call the oyster a keystone species, which means the whole system leans on it. A healthy oyster reef is not just oysters. It is a hard, living wall full of crabs, small fish, and hundreds of other species that have nowhere else to live, and it builds on itself. Young oysters need a hard surface to grab onto, and the best surface is the shell of older oysters, so a reef stacks generation on generation until it becomes its own small country on the bay floor. To picture how much of this we once had, go back a few centuries. When the first Dutch settlers reached the mouth of the Hudson, New York Harbor may have held close to half the oysters on Earth. Reefs covered an estimated 220,000 acres of the harbor floor. The Dutch even named the islands after them. The place we now call Ellis Island was Little Oyster Island, and Liberty Island was Great Oyster Island. Oysters were street food, sold by the basket on the docks of Lower Manhattan. Down in the Chesapeake, the reefs were even more staggering. They piled up so high and so dense that they broke the surface and became a hazard, something ship captains had to steer around. For a long time, this looked endless. A whole economy grew on top of it in New York and Maryland and Virginia, built on the idea that the supply would never run out. But a supply that feels endless is the easiest one to destroy. Through the 1800s, and into the 1900s, the boats took everything they could reach. Dredges scraped the reefs flat. The same beds were worked again and again, faster than the oysters could ever rebuild. Then disease moved in, and the runoff from growing cities poured sewage and waste into the water. In New York, the last commercial oyster bed closed in 1927. The reefs that had fed the city for 300 years were functionally gone. In the Chesapeake, the decline was slower, but it ended in the same place. Today, only about 1 to 2% of the bay's historic reefs are left. And when the oysters disappeared, the water lost its filter. Algae bloomed unchecked, sunlight could not reach the bottom, and the grasses and the crabs and the fish went with it. A living bay turned green and lifeless. If watching a place come back from the dead is your kind of story, subscribe to Comeback Atlas and stay with this one, because around 2014, people on both coasts decided these bays were worth saving. In the Chesapeake, Maryland, and Virginia signed an agreement in 2014 with a hard target. They would fully restore the oyster reefs in 10 separate tributaries by 2025. Not study them, restore them. And in 2025, they hit it, roughly 2,294 acres of reef rebuilt across all 10. The clearest proof is a quiet stretch of water called Harris Creek in Maryland. It became the first tributary declared fully restored back in 2021. To do it, crews planted around 2 billion young oysters across about 350 acres of creek bed, dropping them from boats onto old shell and stone. Across the bay, Maryland's oyster population has roughly tripled since 2005. Then there is New York. In 2014, students at a harbor high school started the Billion Oyster Project with a goal that sounds impossible. 1 billion live oysters back in New York Harbor by 2035. They grow them, sink them onto reef sites, and rebuild the beds the city paved over a century ago. By late 2025, they had put back more than 150 million oysters across about 18 sites, using over 2 million pounds of shells saved from city restaurants instead of landfills. Those numbers turn into something you can measure in the water itself. In Harris Creek, the restored reefs are now thick enough to filter the entire creek in under 10 days. In a single year, they strip out an amount of nitrogen equal to about 20,000 bags of fertilizer, a cleanup that would cost more than $1.7 million to do any other way. The animals do it for free. In New York, scientists estimate that a full billion oysters would filter all the water in the harbor about every 3 days. Clearer water lets sunlight reach the bottom again, and the underwater grasses that died off with the oysters get a chance to grow back. And the wildlife reads the change before any report does. In water that was written off as dead, divers are now finding seahorses and pufferfish settling back into the new reefs. The oysters did not just clean the water, they rebuilt the neighborhood, and the old residents are moving home. None of this is finished, and that is the honest part. The Chesapeake is still sitting at around 1 to 2% of the reefs it once had. In New York, the harbor oysters still cannot be safely eaten, because when it rains hard, the city's old sewers still overflow into the water. The billion oyster goal is years away, and a single bad storm or a new disease could undo a lot of patient work. This is a comeback in progress, not a finished victory, but the direction has changed. The water is clearer than it was. The reefs are growing instead of vanishing. Animals nobody had seen in those bays for decades are back. The smallest creature in the bay, the one you would never look at twice, turned out to be its lungs. One humble animal, put back by the million, is pulling 2 of America's great bays back from the dead. And if that is the kind of comeback you want more of, subscribe to Comeback Atlas. Next time, a river so polluted it actually caught fire and the long fight to bring it back to life.